technology, digital leadership. And if this is your first time, thank you for joining us. If you've been with us more. Back. Sorry about that. Zoom crashed all of a sudden. It's one of those things that just happens when you are presenting with Zoom and unstable internet connections and this kind of stuff. But as I was saying, yeah, thank you all for joining. The topic for today's session is about curriculum design, but specifically for curriculum design catering to the needs of digital learners and, of course, being flexible enough that you can deliver curriculum for different audiences, including face-to-face, virtual, hybrid environments. So specifically, we'll talk about curricular design from the pedagogical foundation, as well as how to adapt and be flexible for distance learning. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll kick off the webinar. All right, hey everyone. So this is the webinar curricular design for distance learning. And the topics we'll cover today is I'll give a brief introduction to BSD and talk to you a little bit more about what we do, but I'll keep it short. Secondly, we'll talk about, well, there's really kind of 3 steps to designing curriculum. First step is starting with a strong pedagogical foundation, which will kind of give you something to lean upon and drive your values for what you want to create. Secondly, you'll need to kind of align yourself to some type of learning standards. And then third, designing for flexibility so that we can deliver the content digitally, physically, face-to-face, distance learning, hybrid, etc. Lastly, I'll share with you some example projects from BSD about how we approach this process. And then lastly, I'll give you some time to have Q&A, comments, questions, thoughts, and reflections. So those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark, and I'm the Vice President of Education at BSD. And my role is that I oversee the curriculum design, curriculum development, and lesson activities that we produce at BSD. And it's also my role to make sure that our curriculum is aligned to some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, like our pedagogy and the standards and the way that we design the curriculum in such a way for it to be innovative and relevant to students. And I'm also a PhD student at Chiang Mai University in Northern Thailand, which is where I'm coming to you live from today. So about BSD, we're an education technology company, and we design curriculum, and our goal is to teach students digital skills. And there's a wide variety of digital skills that we teach, but we tend to lean on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as the coding part of those digital skills. So in order to do that, we have a platform that contains all the content. It's interactive, so students can use it, and it functions along with teachers. And along with that, we provide training and support so that teachers can feel comfortable and that they have ease in using these technologies. And they also learn a little bit of digital skills themselves, with the ultimate output being real impact, because all of our projects are project-based and connected to kind of real-world themes, and students are making real projects, not just examples or templates, but everything that they make is using real code, hosted online and accessible, that you can share. So at BSD, we kind of have these 3 areas in which we design all of our curriculum, and it's these 3 areas that we think are most important for the future development of students. Firstly are hard skills like coding and programming. We also teach content creation, data analysis, and even some more concrete skills like artificial intelligence and VR. Along with that, because students are working in a project-based environment, we include soft skills like communication, collaboration, and critical thinking, especially when students have to work with each other or work with their teachers to really think critically about solving problems and producing artifacts in the projects. On top of all of that, we have our CARE values. So CARE is the acronym that we use at BSD to describe curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. As a matter of fact, the last webinar that we had was all about CARE. If you're more interested in that particular part of what we do, you can find the recorded video on YouTube. So the main goal for this talk is about, how do you approach curriculum design, or how do you start that process? And so I mentioned earlier, there's kind of three main steps. First is the pedagogical foundation. Second is aligning to standards. And then third is designing for flexibility. So it all starts with a strong pedagogical foundation. So what I'll do is I'll share with you at BSD what our pedagogical foundation is, and then I'll leave you some information about maybe how you can start to discover your own pedagogical foundations. For us at BSD, we lean on the pedagogical foundation of the learning theory called constructionism. Constructionism is kind of this idea that students, or really anyone, they learn best by doing things, creating things, making things that are tangible. And when they do that, they're actually creating two versions of those things. One is the physical thing they're making, and the other one is the thing that they're making in their mind, which is a copy of that. And those things have a synchronicity between them, so that if one thing is changed, the other must change also. And this can really flourish, in computer coding, in robotics, engineering, but it can also be something as simple as making art. So in the image you see here, this is Seymour Papert, who kind of created or co-created this learning theory of constructionism. And he was studying how children best learn computer programming way back in the 1960s with the Logo programming language, which was this little turtle that you could program. And in the image here, you can see the robotic version of the turtle, which has a pin inside of it. And so students would write code and the robot would move forward and it would trace a line. So you could start to use code to draw art using technology and robotics. It's kind of amazing to me to think that this was already taking place in the 1960s, and it's now just today starting to flourish around the world. So because of that long history of working in the field of education technology, we think that constructionism provides a very robust foundation for us to draw inspiration from, and also for us to design our curriculum going forward. So if you want to learn more about constructionism, you can also look at some of our previous blog posts on the BSD website. So to further define what it means to develop a constructionist technology, a constructionist technology has to meet these three criteria. The first criteria is that it must be easy for anyone to get started. So that means that anyone should be able to use the technology without any prior learning. They should be able to just jump right into it and do something effective with it. The second criteria is that there must be room to go deeper, so that if I want to learn deep concepts and I want to get really involved in something and go really deep, then I can do that. And then lastly, it has to be designed for play, which means that there needs to be an element of playfulness to it, so that students can tinker with it, so students can play with it, where there's just this natural feeling of fun. But in the field of constructionism, we take that word fun and we add the word hard to it. Hard fun is what we call the joy of doing difficult things. So, I mean, everyone has felt that experience before in your life where you've had to do something difficult, but you really enjoyed doing it. For me, that's learning how to play the guitar. And I've kind of tinkered with the guitar my whole life. But recently I've been watching YouTube videos, trying to learn, how to get the chords and the progressions and the strumming. And it is hard and it requires a lot of patience and practice, but it's fun. So I enjoy it. So I think, playing guitar is kind of like a constructionist technology. Anybody can get a guitar and start strumming around on it, and there's room to go deeper. You start to learn solos and different movements, and it brings about that experience of hard fun. So at BSD, we designed the entire learning experience on this pedagogical foundation of constructionist technologies, and we think that it's a very powerful approach because it's easy to access and provides a stimulating environment for students to be enriched and learn a lot. So along with our pedagogical foundation, we have just some other philosophies that we lean upon that are part of our foundation. And these all support everything that we do at BSD. So here's a list of just a few more things that are important to us. We think that learning should be hands-on and experiential. We think that students learn best when they are doing a physical project. We know that students are doing better when they are doing real world learning and they know the why of what they're doing. We think that students all learn at different paces, and that sometimes, it's important for our teachers to teach everything at once, and then other times students can go and race ahead at their own pace, or maybe they need remedial and they need to drop back and get some additional learning. We also believe that help should always be within reach. So in our platform, we have several levels of help where students can access teachers. Teachers can access our BSD support for any help with our programming or platform. And then lastly, in order for it to all work really nicely and work well, we believe that good user interface and user experience is important, because you need to be able to navigate and you need to be able to access the platform in such a way that it's intuitive and easy. So all of those things kind of build what our pedagogical foundation was. So we decided early on to use this as a framework to help us build all of our curriculum, all of our activities. So if you're designing curriculum or lessons or activities, it's important for you to kind of have laid out some values and some ideas about, what is that strong pedagogical foundation that you can lean upon. So if you are in the midst of designing your own curriculum or lessons, these are the questions that you should consider asking yourself about pedagogy. So, how did BSD, pick the constructionism pedagogy versus, a multitude of different other types? Well, we first looked at our values as the company and what we wanted to do in education and how we wanted to interact with our teachers and students. And those values kind of pointed towards play-based learning and constructionism and making things fun and engaging. So our values are what led us to the particular pedagogy. So then we looked at how those values can help us drive the digital content. So how do we start to make lessons that are aligned to that content, aligned to that pedagogy? So it all kind of just came together. If you are wondering more about how you can learn about pedagogy, it may be a kind of a new topic for you. I'm going to leave you with a link. Actually, my colleague Beth, who's here on the call with me, she's going to drop a link into the chat right now to one of my favorite blogs about pedagogy. It's called The Cult of Pedagogy, and it's by a blogger and a teacher in the US named Jennifer. And she's been blogging about this topic for, I don't know, about 8 years. And it's really just the most compelling and interesting articles about pedagogy, research-based, and it's just a fantastic resource for you to really dive in and start looking at what are the different pedagogical approaches, because it's really important that you have this strong foundation before you move forward into the next steps, like creating content and aligning to standards. So please take a peek at that website and maybe bookmark it for later thorough investigation. I think you could probably spend hours looking at the Cult of Pedagogy website. I also want to share another resource. This is a document called the BSD Curriculum Development Process, and it goes into much more detail about our process, about our pedagogical foundation. And this document was used as a way for us to become accredited and certified by Digital Promise. And Digital Promise is an organization in the US that certifies curricular content because of its research-based practices. So everything we do at BSD is backed by research practices. And so in this document, you can learn a lot more about our approaches. And those approaches can be replicated because it's already been certified. So my colleague Beth is also going to put a link to this document into the chat. Once again, it's another thing where you could really dig into and peruse through it a bit later. But I want to share that with you all as an additional resource. So we went over the first step, which is having a strong pedagogical foundation. The second step is to use learning standards that already exist. And this kind of takes away some of the difficult work of creating curriculum, because you don't have to like think of brand new things. You look at learning standards that already exist and design curriculum that aligns to those. So when I say learning standards, what I mean by that is, like depending on where you are in the world, there are different learning standards. If you are teaching at an IB school, there are IB standards. If you're teaching at an American school, there are NSTA standards and CSTA standards, et cetera. If you're in India, the Ministry of Education has a set of standards for every subject. There's the Cambridge standards. There's just so many different ones out there. And that's why we think that they're valuable to lean upon. And the reason why we like using learning standards is because they're already research-based. They've already been vetted by institutions, by schools, by teachers, and by students. They're credible because of this process of them being researched and vetted. And then lastly, they're reliable. They tend to stay in effect for several years. Occasionally, standards get updated along the way, but it's really kind of a body of work that you can always rely upon. So, you might be in a situation where you have to use a certain set of standards. Like, for example, if you teach in an IB school, you're going to use the IB standards. And so sometimes we don't have a lot of choice on what those standards are. And so we have to be able to work with inside of those. And those standards, should provide a way for us to create content and curriculum that aligns to it. So at BSD, we lean on two different standards, the ISTE Standards for students and the CSTA Standards for computer science. So if you've never heard of those are widely recognized standards. Especially ISTE is now becoming such a global institution for digital citizenship and digital learning skills. And so we have been relying heavily upon ISTE for many years at BSD, and we've recently picked up the CSTA Computer Science Standards for K-12. So I'll share a little bit more about these, but I won't go into great detail because there's a lot of content, a lot of information that you can look at about these standards. What I want to focus on is just how can we look at these standards and start to design content in such a way that it aligns and meets the rigor of these content standards. So, for ISTE, the focus is on digital skills and 21st century skills. So if you look at our, I mentioned earlier in one of the first slides, our hard skills, our soft skills, and our care values kind of are really complementary to the ISTE standards. So these standards were released in 2016. You can see these are the main categories. Inside of those categories, there's further explanation and there's further breakdown based on grade level, et cetera. So if you haven't had much time to look at the ISTE standards, I'm going to ask Beth to drop another link into the chat that will provide information about the ISTE student standards for each of these categories, so you can explore more about how some of these might be best implemented in your classroom, or you can start to think about how can you use these standards as a way to develop new content and new curriculum. The other set of standards that we lean upon are the CSTA Computer Science Standards. And because at BSD we do teach HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's important for us to be able to align to actual computer science standards. And so the CSTA standards are built on these 7 areas. And I think that what I like about CSTA is that it isn't just about syntax. It isn't just about learning how to code. They also build in other important implementations about computer science, like learning about computing culture, which includes diversity and inclusion and bias, collaborating around computing, so working with other people. So they actually build in some soft skills as well. So we think that using CSTA and ISTE as a powerful approach for digital learning, especially when it comes to using computers and doing computer science. So if you haven't heard of CSTA, my colleague Beth is also going to drop another link into the chat about the CSTA K-12 computer science standards. Similar to ISTE, there's these 7 main categories, and then inside of that, there are lots of breakdowns based on grade level, et cetera. So do take some time to look through those as well. I've probably given you enough resources just in this one webinar for you to dive into for several weeks. So, in this process of thinking about standards, the first question you should ask yourself is, what subject area am I going to teach? And what are the standards that match that subject area? So, if I'm an art teacher, if I'm a math teacher, et cetera, each of those subject areas is going to have a certain set of standards. So first, you've got your pedagogical foundation, then you've got your standards. All right, so you've got to get those things first before you even start to design curriculum or lessons or activities, because you need those as a guide. These things are going to be the guide to help you design the curriculum. So then the last question is, now that I know about the pedagogy and now that I know about the standards, what are some curriculum or lesson activities that I can start to design that will align to those things, that will align to my values and to the pedagogical approach and also to the standards? You got to have all those things in place first. So that's why it's important that we cover these things. So next, I want to talk about, once we have that strong foundation and we know where we're going and what we want to design, let's talk about designing content that's flexible enough so that it can be taught in a hybrid environment, face-to-face environment, online environments, distance learning. So we think that it's important that, because the nature of change has been so rapid lately, that it's kind of a best idea to design things for virtual or face-to-face. So instead of designing for just one particular way of learning, next week, the month later, that could all change, right? And then we're back to online teaching again. So we found that it's best to just design high quality content that can be used for either environment and also for self-guided learning. We've seen a lot of students really excel doing their own self-paced guided learning with video tutorials, etc. So these are all options for you to start thinking about. So now start thinking about what is the delivery process of the content I'm going to design. So whenever we do consider flexibility and delivering content, we want to make sure that students have lots of ways to access it. But here are some things that I wouldn't recommend, and some things that are distracting from the main content or the lesson delivery process. We shouldn't make work easier or harder to make it flexible. We shouldn't give them less or more work. We shouldn't have to create multiple lessons. Sometimes as teachers, we feel like we're juggling a lot. And if we want to reach all of our students and all of their different needs, then we end up having to make multiple lessons. That's not necessary. We also don't have to do curve grading, dumbing down the content, or giving students busy work. So maybe at some point in your life, you've experienced some of this type of flexibility, and it's just not the most conducive, time-saving, or valuable to the students. But what flexibility is designing lessons and activities that meet the students where they are. So no matter where they are, you can design lessons and activities that meet the standards, that are aligned to your pedagogical foundation, and also challenge students in meaningful ways. I know we're getting to that buildup. We're like, but how do we do it? Okay, so there are 3 areas of flexibility. So you can modify the content, you can modify the process, or you can modify the final output, the product or deliverable. So the content, when I say you can modify the content, it still has to meet the rigor of the standard. So let's just say I was a social studies teacher and I was delivering content about ancient Egypt. Well, all of my students need to learn about that topic because it's a part of the standards. But I can modify the content and meet the students' reading ability. I can meet their different needs. And so what I might provide is a set of resources. So there might be videos, there might be Wikipedia articles, there might be magazine articles. So I can modify that and tailor it to each student based on what they need, but I'm not changing the content. The second way is to change the process. So we all know that children learn in multiple different ways. So, some students, it's better for them to listen to something, to have an audiobook, or to watch something, or to have a combination of those things. So it's important to always provide multiple ways for students to access content, and it meets them where they are. Lastly, you can also allow students to deliver the final product of what they learn by giving them options. And I'll share more about those options in just a moment. But these three main ways help us to design content that matches the standards, that aligns to our pedagogical foundation, but is also flexible enough to meet every student where they are with their own needs. So, but before we talk about the choices, I want to kind of do a little scenario with you. I want you to think back to some dining experiences that you've had, and think about a restaurant you've gone to that has a really good menu, and think about a restaurant that has a really bad menu. For me, I think that a good menu has pictures. First of all, I want to see an image of the food, not just the words and the descriptions. And what makes a bad restaurant menu for me is like if the menu is 30 pages long. It's got Italian food, it's got Indian food, it's got American food, Thai food. It's like way too many choices. I'm overwhelmed already. I can't even order a drink. So a good menu needs to have concise information, and it shouldn't be overwhelming. The reason why I'm asking you to think about a food menu is because you can think about it in the same way that we would ask students to design content by giving them a bit of voice and choice in what they design. So I have a list here of different types of products. So we've got written products, presentation products, technological products, and media products. And this is a really long list. So this would be the example of the bad menu. It's got too many things on there. So what I would do with this list is, let me go back to my example. If I'm a social studies teacher and I'm teaching about ancient Egypt, what I might do is I might pick 3 of these products, and then I would present those to students and say, of these 3 different types of products, make one of these and demonstrate your learning. So, maybe I would choose a book report, and I might choose video, and then I might choose graphic presentation, for example. So I would pick those 3, and then students would have to, each student would then get to pick just from that list of 3. Because when you give them this list, it's a bit overwhelming, and then you spend more time thinking about it than you do actually learning or making something as a part of the product choice. So this is not an end-all list of possible products that students could make. I think it just represents a nice list of things to kind of just get your mind going. So, think about what are some different products that I can have my students design and build, and how can I give them some voice and choice in that so that they can demonstrate their strengths and their skills. So that was kind of in a nutshell, the best way to approach curriculum design, starting with the pedagogical foundation, leaning on the learning standards that already exist, and then designing content that's flexible so that students have a choice in what they eventually present to you is really what we believe to be the most compelling way to design curriculum, whether it's face-to-face, virtual, hybrid, distance, etc. What I want to do now is just share with you some sample projects that we have designed at BSD that match that process that I just shared with you. So this first project is called Personal Web Page. And on the personal web page, students are actually going to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make a web page about themselves. You can see it's got like a header and title and images, and then there's sections. And in the sections, students share about their favorite things. But alongside the project, students are also learning about digital citizenship and privacy. So the way our curriculum is designed is that students are building an artifact. They're making something tangible, that constructionist pedagogical foundation. Then alongside that, with our values in hard skills, soft skills, and care, we're teaching content to them about privacy. So when they do make their personal web page, they're not putting out any private information on that. They're putting out just enough information for it to be interesting and share something that's compelling to them, but they're not putting their personal information on there. The next example is a multi-page website. So this would kind of be the next step. Is after students have learned a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they can make more complex pages. And so this is a page that students would design for a potential community organization. So the example community organization in the project is the Kind Hearts Animal Sanctuary. And in the lesson, students can design and replicate this Kind Hearts Animal Sanctuary community organization, or by working with a teacher, they can go into their own communities and they can find community organizations that need a new website. And they would help and work with that organization to develop the content for the website. Along the way, they would be learning about community organization benefits and about designing with empathy, understanding the customer, seeking relationships with that customer and how to solve problems. So our curriculum, it blends together all of these unique aspects, and it leans upon, the ISTE standards, the CSTA standards, backed by the pedagogical foundation, it just kind of really brings it all together nicely. If this is something that interests you, we'd love to have you take a free trial. So we're offering currently a free trial that includes 8 projects. So you would have access to 8 of our projects. And the projects that we have as a part of the free trial also contain video tutorials. So if you're new to coding, you've never done coding before, or you think that might be a little bit scary, don't worry. The video tutorials will walk you through every single step of the way. And yeah, so the 8 projects are the ones listed here. And the topic of these projects is about using code as a way to amplify your voice. So the curriculum package is called Code is Your Voice. And inside the curriculum, students will be, making several different web pages. There's a trivia game application. And then one of the other projects called Support My Cause allows students to create a campaign and then collect email addresses to share that campaign and get support for their campaign. And all of these projects, once they're created, are shared on the web and are hosted for free, so that these projects kind of live in their own life and they can be shared with your friends, family, etc. So if you're interested in the free trial, my colleague Beth is going to drop the link to the free trial into the chat. And as soon as you sign up, you'll get an email from us, and we will walk you through the rest of the process. Lastly, I want to drop another link into the chat to receive some feedback. We just want to hear from you if this webinar was helpful for you, if there was anything that was useful to you, and also what topics you may want to hear about in the future, or just any other comments or feedback that you might have about the webinar or BSD in general. So hey, thanks everyone for joining. I do want to stop the presentation and leave a moment for Q&A, thoughts, reflections, or any comments that people may have. And feel free to drop a question into the chat, or you can, come off of mute and ask here in the Zoom chat. Beth, did you have any questions that came in on your end?
No questions on my end.
Awesome. So yeah, I just want to remind everyone, the 3 main parts of designing, any curriculum is, first of all, starting with a strong pedagogical foundation, which you would need to investigate and figure out what that would be for you. Then you would think about what are the learning standards that I might need to align to, that connects to my subject area, or it might even be the learning standards that are assigned to me by my school or by my government. And then thirdly is, how can I take that foundation of the pedagogy and the standards and start to build compelling and flexible curriculum that matches that, which also gives students a bit of voice and choice, which means that they can share what they know best, and also give them a bit of reason to be more interested in the content. So thanks everyone for joining today, and we hope to see you in future webinars. And if there are no further questions, let's go ahead and close out the webinar, Beth.